by now you have received all of your work that you've done for the past week. So a quiz, there's a writing from yesterday, and some other papers in there. So make sure you have all of those and have out your review sheet. So we're going to go through that. We're only going to go through your essays. The IDs we've done. We've talked about them in class. They were up on the board. So you should have those in your notes. If you don't, you might want to find a friend and see if they will let you borrow theirs to copy down. So, while I am here today and you are here, we are still going to go over information for your test. And your test is going to be Monday. Remember Monday, IDs, there are 5 of them. You need to tell me what or who it is, when it happened, and why it's such a big deal, the historical significance, how did it change America. Then on Tuesday, you're going to have your essays, and your essays are going to have 3 of them, and they need to be thorough. The essays have to be finished in class on Tuesday. The IDs have to be finished in class on Monday. So there's no extension. It has to be done during that time, but I've made it a 2-day test so that it's easier for you to do that. Now, let's start with some of these essay questions. The first one, identify and analyze the factors that changed the American city in the second half of the 19th century. So, first of all, focus on the second half of the 19th century. Also focus on identify and analyze. So, first let's identify some of these factors that changed the American city. The growth of industry. Think about the steel industry, the oil industry, the railroad industry, all of these industries that have helped change the city, the impact they had. The steam engine, okay, along with the steam engine and the railroad, people can travel faster. The railroads, the cities that pop up along these railroads, and the transportation of people into the city now, where before it was really hard for them to get there. Large factories, what impact did these large factories have on cities, especially when they took them near the cities, or some factories went into the cities because that's where the people were. Increased immigration. How did increased immigration change the American city? Think about the separate time periods of immigration. The older immigrants, the newer immigrants, the port cities, those cities right there, like Boston, how were those impacted? Skyscrapers and bridges. How did this whole concept with steel and the Bessemer process, processing steel faster, allow for the creation of bridges and skyscrapers? And how did skyscrapers and bridges make a huge change in the American city, along with electric lights, the urban planning, how cities are structured, and then of course the dumbbell tenement. How did that affect the cities? So once you've identified all of these, or a couple of them, you don't have to use every single one of these, pick a couple that you know the most about, and then analyze, tell me how 2 of these changed the American city in the second half of the 19th century. Remember, the second half is going to be the end of the 1800s. Okay, second question. How successful was organized labor in improving the position of workers in the period, I should say from, not from 1875 to 1900. Analyze the factors that contributed to the level of success achieved. First thing you're going to do, how successful was organized labor? So you have to tell me, yes, it was successful, no, it wasn't successful, between 1875 and 1900. Then you're going to analyze the factors that contributed to the level of success you mentioned. So, one thing you need to know, most unions collapsed. Remember the Knights of Labor? After that Haymarket Square incident in Chicago, they fell apart. Most women and minorities were not accepted in the unions. Remember, the Knights of Labor accepted everyone in the American Federation of Labor. They were very picky about who they chose. Most strikes were crushed and achieved few goals. Think about Homestead, Pullman, Haymarket. Less than 10% of the people belonged to the unions by 1900. Immigration made it easier to replace workers. Yellow dog contracts. If you were a worker, you were sometimes forced to sign a yellow dog contract that you would not join a union, because remember, the employers did not want their employees working for a union. There were lockouts, scabs. These are people who needed jobs, so when workers went on strike, they were hired in a lot cheaper than the worker, So why would the employer want to hire back the original worker if they had these scabs? Scabs were usually immigrants. The courts usually supported the company and not the worker. The Sherman Act. Remember company towns. People living in these company towns. Remember what their life was like. It was hard to succeed with semi-skilled and unskilled workers in your unions. You were too easy replaced. You didn't really have any leg to stand on to make point. And then the radical movements that gave unions bad names. The Knights of Labor. Remember how they said those 8 were anarchists, and it just dissolved from that. And also information about Haymarket, Homestead, and Pullman. So, taking in information you know about these, you have to tell me how successful organized labor was in improving the position of the workers from 1875 to 1900. After you state, yes, it was successful, no, it wasn't successful, it was somewhat successful, you need to tell me why. What factors contributed to the level of success that you mentioned up here? All right, last question. How and why did transportation development spark economic growth during the period from 1860 to 1900 in the U.S.? This is that big question down there at the bottom. So, how? How did transportation development spark economic growth, and why did transportation development spark economic growth? So, don't forget railroad expansion, huge. You must mention the railroad. Without the railroads, people wouldn't be able to get out west. The cities wouldn't have started popping up along these railways, like Ben Davis, the town of Ben Davis. Streetcars, cable cars, the transportation facilitated economic growth. Remember back when we talked about nationalism and how we started our own economy. This right here with the railroad shows the growth of a national market. We have now brought the West Coast and the East Coast together to create that national market. And the railroad allows for that transportation of goods to be faster. Remember the industries that came out of the railroad, like the cattle industry. Remember the entrepreneurs like Sears and Roebuck. Okay? The railroad, it needed steel, iron, coal, and wood. If we didn't have that, we couldn't have the railroad. So all of those industries boomed because of the railroad. The railroad employed many people. They had to build it, and then they had to operate it. The railroad led to increased immigration and land sales. Don't forget, the Chinese in the late 1800s came over to work on those railroads. The land sales, remember land grants. People could buy land from the government near these railroads. The growth of an integrated national market, which is what we talked about up here earlier with the railroads bringing the entire country together and creating a national market rather than just smaller markets. The big businesses emerge like Sears. We also get the large department stores. National competition. Goods are transported faster, cheaper. You can go farther with them. Growth of business, meatpacking, fresh produce, cattle. We can transport minerals. Agriculture expansion. We have the population shifts from the rural areas to the urban areas. The Carnegie and the steel industry, Rockefeller and oil. The railroad stimulating post-Reconstruction economic development in the South. So all of these go into how and why transportation development sparked economic growth during the period 1860 to 1900. So tell me how it did, and then tell me why. So it's kind of like the other question where you're identifying the ideas and then analyzing them. You're telling me how it developed and then why it sparked, how that development sparked that growth. Alright, so there are 3 essay questions, so there's no reason not to do well. I just told you the 3 essay questions that are going to be on the test on Tuesday. So make sure you study these. Okay, this is for Tuesday. On Monday, you're going to have 5 identifications. Make sure you check the website Sunday night. There can be some helpful hints. We have identified every single ID that will be on the test. If we didn't identify it, it won't be on the test. So you have the identifications in your notes. If you followed along in class, you should have them. Also, make sure you bring something to write with. Make sure you bring something to write on. Okay? So, now that we're finished with this, you're going to go ahead and you're going to take out the yellow document book. Some of us started this yesterday, some of us didn't. The yellow document book that we usually use in class. And you're going to open it to page 106. You're also going to be given a handout that tells which pages to read, and the questions that I want you to answer as you go through and read these documents. And this is information that you can also use in these essays on Tuesday. So make sure you work on this and turn the paper in before you leave. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Monday.